Hello and welcome. This is Turtle Island Tetragrammaton. My name is Nicole Jera. I'm a gender fluid LGBTQIA plus ally and Christian patriot. Twice before I've read from Bernhard Guenther's new Substack, Time of Transition. I've read all of his works. Not all of his articles. He's got a lot of articles on his website. So if this piques your interest, please support his Substack. And personally, I'm a member on his website, veilofreality.com. He does a lot of podcasts. That's what I was frustrated with on the last article. It was a shorter one, but I felt like he didn't go into as much depth as he could have. And he ended the article with, listen to the podcast we did on this. And sometimes I just want to read. So that was my gripe, but there's no gripe. I mean, it's just more information. And this topic is so deep that sometimes a podcast does help you. They speak so eloquently on these important topics for the spiritual war. That's why I want to also apologize. In my last video, I kind of was dissing Bernhard because I said he was unfunny. And I want to honor his role for the awakening and not, it's hard to make light of these deep subjects. But I have to recognize I'm not here to just read jokes and laugh. I'm here to learn about the energies regarding the spiritual war. So that's something I'm doing here. In the Time of Transition Substack, this third article is called Mass Psychosis, Egregores, and the Invisible War for Human Consciousness. Subtitle: How Hyperdimensional Forces Manipulate the Masses and How to Break Free. Published June 12th. That was 2 days ago. It's an image here. It's funny, the image literally looks like it's AI. Why would he use this kind of image? I don't understand. It's just fucking weird. His last article was all about AI, and yet he's using AI. So what is depicted here? Maybe this image to the left in the stars. It's like a neural web of spirituality, of lessons, of teachers. There's a row of crows, a lot of large black birds, a spiritual body, and then many people watching the one. So you could see this image as the one, or as the person who will see the light, you could say, because that's what's being shown here. The first person who wakes up in a sea of watchers. What do these watchers become after they witness someone being illumined and enlightened? Will they follow suit and illumine themselves onto themselves to know self? I don't have a scroll bar. I don't know why I can't see a scroll bar. I like to see scroll bars, but I don't see one. The illusion of external change. I try to tally mark these. Topic 1. The illusion of external change. I recall participating in one of the largest coordinated global anti-war protests in history, with events taking place in over 600 cities worldwide. It was a protest against the war in Iraq in February 2003. I joined the protest in Los Angeles, which drew over 150,000 participants, and an estimated 15 million people protested worldwide. I was already, quote, red-pilled back then, actively exposed 9/11 as an inside job, writing and talking about all the inconsistencies with the official narrative and the infamous, quote, collapse of Building 7. In those naive early days, I thought it would be just a matter of time before everyone would wake up to the truth of what really happened. Wow, yeah, I can relate. I was very inspired by the number of people who attended the protest worldwide and thought that we were all on the same page, sharing an insatiable thirst for truth and a desire to expose lies. I really love this because Bernhard is talking about his perspective and his life, which I haven't gotten in the previous 2 articles. He did not talk about himself at all, so this is really a treat to read from his perspective. I'll continue now. In my wishful thinking, I thought we'd arrest all the bad guys in the next couple of years, expose all the corruption and atrocities, and prepare for a collective awakening. I imagined we'd usher in the golden age in 2012, complete with UFO disclosure and celebrations with the Galactic Federation of Light, who had promised to take down the cabal and reveal themselves. I should say the cabal is in quotes. Who had promised to take down the, quote, cabal and reveal themselves on December 21st, 2012, based on some channeled material I followed back then. I call it my adolescent romantic new age days, like a little kid who thinks they know everything, or the romantic wishful thinking phase, with all the positive projections. When you have a crush and don't see the shadow in the other person because it's all overlaid with your own soul/anima projections. Little did I know that this day would mark a big change in that view, along with a big disillusionment. I kind of missed what that said. Little did I know that this day would mark a big change in that view, along with a big disillusionment. That's crazy he was waiting for a specific date. And then on that date, I remember where I was on that day. Big disillusionment when that day came and nothing happened. I saw it as a gradual shift. I did party on that day because people talked about a world ending. And it was just a shift. It was just the beginning of a new cycle. Topic 2. When the shadow takes over. As I was walking down the street during the protests in a big mass crowd of people chanting anti-war slogans, and, quote, 9/11 was an inside job, end quote, something shifted suddenly. People started running. It began with a few dozen people, but quickly grew to hundreds, then thousands. I had to watch out not to get overrun. I didn't know what was happening, but I saw a few masked guys in black clothing throwing rocks and vandalizing stores, cars, and property. More and more people joined in the violence and destruction. All of a sudden, police in riot gear started running towards the crowd of people, spraying tear gas and shooting rubber bullets. Total chaos ensued. It's crazy how this happens at every protest. So funny. The energetic shift was palpable, like something was overtaking people. There was panic, fear, rage, and hostility in the air. I felt as if an outside force was trying to overtake me, and as it was overtaking others. Thankfully, I was able to stay calm in the storm while masses of people around me went mad. I left the scene and went home. It was the day when I realized the futility of protesting. The U.S. and its allies invaded Iraq a month later, based on lies, resulting in over 1 million deaths. I'm rewinding to finish this sentence. It was the day when I realized the futility of protesting or just striving for change externally, trying to, quote, wake up people via information alone. Without inner psycho-spiritual work and a shift in consciousness, nothing will change. I'm telling you, this guy is really wise. He's a really good person. Oh, I do have a bar. Okay. I'm going to reread it because it's really important. Without inner psycho-spiritual work and a shift in consciousness, nothing will change. Topic 3. Excuse me. The Loosh harvest and occult manipulation. A few years before that, I also started to learn about the hyperdimensional occult forces that manipulate humans from non-physical realms and feed off all the, quote, loosh that humans generate. The term, quote, loosh was coined by Robert Monroe based on his experiences and writings on out-of-body experiences. He described loosh as an emotional energy produced by humans that parasitic, non-physical entities feed upon, especially intense negative emotions. This energy is generated through emotional responses to various stimuli, particularly violence, chaos, suffering, and conflict between humans, and appeals to humans' lower animal nature. Rudolf Steiner and other even older esoteric occult teachings mentioned the same forces feeding on humanity. Quote from Rudolf Steiner, quote, "There are beings in the spiritual realms for whom anxiety and fear emanating from human beings offer welcome food. If fear and anxiety radiate from people, they break out in panic. Then these creatures find welcome nutrition, and they become more and more powerful. These beings are hostile towards humanity, end quote. I didn't have the context or full understanding at the time, but later I realized that what I experienced during the protest was a direct manifestation of this phenomenon. I sensed something coming from outside, taking possession of humans, manipulating their behavior, and feeding on the emotional turmoil generated. Topic 4. Mass psychosis and the loss of self. This is an incredibly important read. I'm really grateful to be reading this here. This type of crowd behavior is nothing new from a psychological perspective. Carl Jung talked about this mass psychosis. Jung warned that when individuals fail to confront their own shadow and inner opposites and conflict, they become vulnerable to projecting those unconscious contents onto other people and the external world. When this happens collectively, it can lead to what he called mass psychosis, a breakdown of individual consciousness and reasoning, and a descent into irrational, destructive group behavior. A quote from Carl Jung, quote, "The gigantic catastrophes that threaten us today are not elemental happenings of a physical or biological order, but our psychic events. To quite a terrifying degree, we are all threatened by wars and revolutions, which are nothing other than psychic epidemics." End quote. Marie-Louise von Franz also pointed out how people's unintegrated shadow opens them up to mass psychosis and becoming unconscious instruments of collective evil. Interestingly, she also hinted at how hostile forces use the unconscious shadow as entry points to possess humans and become their puppets. A quote from Marie-Louise von Franz. Quote, "The personal shadow opens the door to the collective shadow. It's like if you have a room and there's one door that's not shut, and there the devil can come in. And if you know your personal shadow, you can shut all the doors. While the average person who doesn't know about her personal shadow gets swept away by the collective evil." That's so intense. More recently, psychologist Matthias Desmet expanded on this in his work on mass formation psychosis and totalitarianism. It gained popularity during the C-19 era, which explained the extreme irrational behavior of, quote, COVIDians. He uses the term to describe a phenomena in which a large group of people falls under a kind of collective psychological spell, driven by fear, propaganda, or a shared ideology, leading to irrational or destructive behavior. Excuse me. Mass formation psychosis is essentially a modern framing of what Jung described as mass psychosis. Jung saw the danger as coming from the unconscious taking over the conscious mind. Mass formation theory views it as stemming from the social manipulation of psychological vulnerabilities. However, both are discussing the same pattern: the loss of individuality and being overtaken by a collective hive mind, leading to widespread delusion and destructive behavior, often turning on other people. Oh, fuck. Topic 5. Egregores. Astral entities of collective thought forms. You can see mass formation psychosis throughout history in political ideologies from far right to far left, such as communist, fascist, and totalitarian regimes that have resulted in the murder of millions of people. All the while, masses of people supporting these regimes were hypnotized automatons carrying out and supporting the agenda. Keep in mind that they never felt they were supporting or engaging in evil acts. They believed they were on the good side, often fueled by self-righteousness and moral superiority, as well as virtue signaling and always projecting an evil image onto the, quote, other side, end quote. At the same time, they felt morally justified, better, and, quote, innocent. Here we go. Here we go, Bernhard. Here we go, Bernhard. You see it on a smaller scale in political and activist movements, such as BLM, quote, Summer of Love, Antifa, Palestine-Israel protests, and most recently, the immigration protests in Los Angeles, which are now spreading to other cities as well. Many of them resulted in violence and property damage, which is most often justified by the people engaging in it. Another version of mass formation psychosis that is also coupled with obvious shadow projection is the phenomenon of TDS. Trump derangement syndrome, and MDS, Musk derangement syndrome. This is all very, very relevant to my personal life. It's incredible. I'm so grateful to be reading this here. A bizarre manifestation of this psychosis was how many regular people who never committed any crimes before started to damage Tesla cars because of their hatred of Musk and Doge. DOGE, DOGE is the Department of Government Efficiency. Which Musk headed with a super smart team to reduce waste and fraud in the United States government in 2025. You can also see this kind of violent protest and polarization as social engineering, utilizing what is called, quote, agent provocateurs, end quote, who initiate violence to prompt others to justify a pre-planned outcome in a classical problem reaction solution Hegelian dialectic fashion. While the use of agent provocateurs and staged chaos is a known CIA deep state tactic, I'm highlighting here the deeper occult dimension and how such events are not just socially engineered, but psychically exploited by egregores and hyperdimensional entities feeding on the loose, unleashed through polarization and violence. Topic 6. How an egregore is born. When people direct emotionally charged thoughts, such as fear, hatred, anger, toward an individual or group, the energy compounds. On an astral occult level, it results in the creation of an egregore, a non-physical entity formed by the collective emotional and mental energy of a group. This can occur in physical locations where groups of people gather, such as protests, or online, on social media, especially through, forgive the language here, outrage porn. It begins with shared belief and charged thought, emotional focus. Over time, the egregore develops a quasi-independent existence, feeding on continued emotionally charged thought projections. The egregore broadcasts these thought forms telepathically into the collective unconscious, influencing the thoughts, emotions, and behaviors of those within their originating group, and even those outside of it who resonate with or come into contact with them. Excuse me. People who are emotionally open, weak-minded, highly suggestible, or resonant with the egregore's frequency can become psychically infected, thinking, feeling, and acting in ways they normally wouldn't. An egregore tags into shadow aspects of people and entices them to project it externally. This influence is non-local. It can occur in physical proximity, such as during protests or rallies, or online through social media. The egregore exists beyond space and time, functioning in the psychic field. I'm just rereading that. The egregore exists beyond space and time, functioning in the psychic field. It also relates to Waitiko, as Paul Levy explored in his work. I'm familiar with Paul Levy. That's cool. So on podcast 111, fucking awesome. They feature Paul Levy as a guest. Really incredible mind. Topic 7, real-world encounters with the invisible. A friend of mine who is highly sensitive to astral energies recently shared an interesting story. He was passing by a pro-Palestine protest in a major city while running errands. As the protesters marched by, he suddenly felt a wave of aggressive, violent energy. An adrenaline rush surged through him, and intrusive thought forms entered his mind. These were thoughts of hatred towards Jews, which he immediately recognized were not his own and rejected them. The protest became violent as regular Jews and businessmen were targeted, who became the object of the mob's projection. My friend sensed the egregore, which appeared to him as an octopus-like entity with masses of tentacles hooked into all the protesters, feeding on, controlling, and drawing energy from their hateful projections, anger, and violence. Here's a depiction of that kind of egregore. It's really dark. He sensed how this egregore tried to get a hook into him, but it had no entry point, and he walked away. After some distance from the protest, the hateful thoughts disappeared, and the energy cleared. On a side note, I know the Palestine-Israel conflict is a sensitive topic for many people. I'm not interested in discussing it here. I wrote an article, created a video about it, drawing on my experience as a pro-Palestine activist. You can read and watch it here. We also have had a 2-hour podcast on that topic you can listen to here. Topic 8. Possession, projection, and feeding louche. Once infected, individuals or crowds can be temporarily or fully possessed by the egregore. This is so intense. I'm going to read it one more time. I'm sorry. But I hope it helps. Once infected, individuals or crowds can be temporarily or fully possessed by the egregore. This often manifests as mob mentality, emotional volatility, irrational rage, violent behavior, and property damage. When fully overtaken, people act like automated extensions of the egregore, turning into zombie-like NPCs. Their frontal cortex goes offline. Their conscious, quote, I is suppressed, creating an entry point for other non-physical, hostile forces to possess the person. People influenced by mob egregores begin to internalize the egregore's voice as their own. Besides being infected by the egregore, they also become vulnerable to hostile entities, feeding off the emotional, quote, loosh, generated through their actions and projections. Hostile entities. This is why trying to reason with them is often fruitless. You're not talking to a conscious person anymore. You're addressing the egregore operating through them. There's no one, quote, home. And engaging is often a waste of time and only drains your energy. For some, the possession is temporary. Others, especially those with deep, unresolved wounds, unintegrated shadow aspects, or spiritual, emotional, and mental weaknesses, can easily become possessed by hostile entities that take advantage of that situation, like a predator instinctively attracted to weak prey. Online mobs that amplify hate and outrage also create powerful psychic attractor fields. These energies affect not just the intended target, but anyone who tunes into or becomes emotionally entangled with them, luring them in to engage and produce the precious loosh. People who engage in online shadow projection and outrage porn, even passively through their thought projections, as, quote, bystanders, such as watching online news videos, feed the egregore while becoming increasingly influenced by it. Damn, that's tough to read. Because obviously we want to stay informed on certain issues. But what Bernhard is saying here is, by learning about the news, you're feeding the egregore. That's hard to read. This creates a closed feedback loop where the egregore grows in power as individuals lose agency. Fanatical ideologies on both the left and right, with both sides projecting onto each other, can become massive egregores, especially when fueled by media manipulation and polarized thinking. Trump derangement syndrome, Musk derangement syndrome, identity politics, protests, movements, and uprisings infused with hatred, violence, and contempt, especially when targeting individuals or other groups, become feeding grounds for egregores of immense size and power. These also attract other occult forces and hostile spirits known to all esoteric traditions for a massive feeding frenzy while manipulating humans like puppets on strings. Topic 9. The inner conquest and the path of individuation. Shadow work is essential to avoid being pulled into mass-induced psychosis or online outrage cycles. Nervous system regulation is equally imperative for the spiritual warrior. Staying regulated in both body and mind is the first line of defense against possession by collective egregores, for dysregulation creates the cracks through which they enter. I'm focused here on body. Interesting to think that even unhealthy food or too much caffeine or sugar, something like that, can actually create dysregulation, which opens you up to collective egregores. I'll continue here. Excuse me. Just gotta catch my breath. The ego is easily tempted to attack others when provoked by groupthink or emotional contagion originating from outside influences. Refuse to feed them, retrieve your projections, and remain anchored in the true self, capital S, regulated and embodied. This is easier said than done, oftentimes because it is so tempting to indulge in the projections because it, quote, feels good. Or even more so, it feels justified. Egregores use thought injections to rationalize hate, rage, and even violence. The solution lies in cultivating enough self-awareness and staying grounded in the true self, capital S, as opposed to the ego personality, through psycho-spiritual work to avoid being pulled into mass-induced psychosis or being overtaken by an egregore. The ego will be strongly tempted to lash out at others, and the egregore and Watiko will install thought injections which you mistake as your own thoughts, that is, seem to justify your hate, rage, and violence. This is part of an ancient occult strategy, divide and conquer, where non-human forces manipulate humans from unseen astral realms. This is so important. This is a really important article. A quote from Sri Aurobindo, Letters on Yoga. He quotes this teacher quite a lot. This is a long quote. Quote, "Look at all that is and has been happening in human history. The eye of the yogin spiritual adept, sees not only the outward events and persons and causes, but the enormous forces which precipitate them into action. If the men who fought were instruments in the hands of rulers and financiers, these in turn were mere puppets in the clutch of those hyperdimensional occult forces. The apparent freedom and self-assertion of our personal being, to which we are so profoundly attached, conceal a most pitiable subjection to 1,000 suggestions and impulsions. Our ego, boasting of freedom, is at every moment the slave, toy, and puppet of countless beings, powers, forces, and influences in universal capital N nature. When one is habituated to see the things behind, one is no longer prone to be touched by the outward aspects, or to expect any remedy from political, institutional, or social changes. The only way out is through the descent of a divine consciousness, which is not the puppet of these forces, but is greater than they are. End quote. Again, from Sri Aurobindo. Yet these... Fuck. Sorry, I just had fast food and I keep burping. Yet these hostile forces have a purpose and a teaching function within the evolutionary process. That's a key sentence right there. The hostile forces have a teaching function within evolution. That is huge. Just to see to zoom out and see the bigger picture. Okay, maybe there's people in your life acting out of fear, anxiety, and rage through an egregore, giving them thoughts and feeding off their discontent. As a key sentence here that Bernhard says is that they can learn through that. And you want to hope that it will fuel their awakening process. Of course he would write this because he was also anti-war. You know, he was pro Palestine. Like he said he was under the influence of certain egregores in his life. That's how he opened up the story with his personal story. Of course he would know that he learned from those hostile forces that were manipulating him. That's profound to me. Sri Aurobindo also emphasized that the cosmic function of hostile forces is to test the sincerity and readiness of the individual, humanity, and the earth itself for spiritual ascension. This is so crucial. I'm just going to quickly reread that. Sri Aurobindo also emphasized that the cosmic function of hostile forces is to test the sincerity and readiness of the individual, humanity, and the earth itself. Rudolf Steiner and others conveyed similar insights in their own work. The esoteric traditions see them as, quote, teachers, for they can only get to you and manipulate you where they have an entry point within your being. In other words, they highlight the issues you need to work on. So careful not to blame entities and fall into the victim blame trap. It is where they want you to get stuck in. From reading this, it looks like Sri Aurobindo works with an entity called the Mother. So it says, as the Mother, Sri Aurobindo's collaborator noted. A quote from the Mother here. Very intense. Quote, there is even a necessity for the existence of hostile forces. They make your determination stronger, your aspiration clearer. It is true, however, that they exist because you gave them reason to exist. So long as there is something in you that answers to them, entry points, their intervention is perfectly legitimate. If nothing in you responded, if they had no hold upon any part of your nature, they would retire and leave you. End quote. These teachings remind us that the battle is never truly, quote, out there. It's through us and fought within to bring forth the capital K kingdom within, which will result in more conscious action in alignment with capital divine, capital will. This will have way more powerful effects on the external world than mechanical, reactive activism or, quote, protesting. The more individuated you are, the more you have integrated your shadow and connected to capital self energy, the less you are influenced by the group's hive mind, mass movements, and collective egregores. You will not be influenced by culture and social trends, nor identify with any side, movement, or group. We must have faith and patience, for we are still little children in light of our evolutionary stage during this time of transition. The inner conquest is a battle indeed, much harder than the outer battle. Hence, many people avoid it, spiritually bypass, or externalize everything, caught in endless victim slash perpetrator slash rescuer cycles, fighting shadows on the wall as they fight each other. We cannot force the process, for the kingdom of heaven cannot be taken by storm. It can only be revealed by clearing and transmuting what is in the way of anchoring the quote divine, no, capital D divine, capital L light. This process also requires conscious inner work and a sincere aspiration to the divine. These articles are fucking intense. Sincerity with oneself is key, and it is also the hardest to establish, regardless of the image we try to portray externally or even to ourselves as we attempt to lie to ourselves. However, before we can become spiritualized and bring forth our soul or true self, we must first become individuated and fully integrated internally, which is the primary purpose of shadow work. I'm just trying to process all this, man. It's so intense. This cannot be skipped. Trying it only results in spiritual bypassing and overestimating one's level of consciousness, as the ego is tempted to hijack the process. Most people are still in the consensus state of hive mind existence, identify with certain groups, cultures, society, religions, ideologies, and political parties, where many of their own desires are also culturally / socially conditioned and not their quote own. Or they are compensations due to unconscious trauma, insecurity, and so on, like children in adult suits trying to fill a bottomless hole. That's huge, man. It's just a comment here, but he writes, like children in adult suits. That's one thing I consider an adult has done this important shadow work. If I were to describe an adult, I would definitely describe someone like Bernhard here and many other teachers who have integrated their shadow or have looked at themselves very deeply. Jordan Peterson says you need to grapple with your capacity for evil. That is deep shadow work right there. And children do all this egregore stuff. You may be 35, 40, 45 years old. There are people even older than that who still focus on this stuff. I know a guy who's 80 years old, and I couldn't call him an adult. You understand what I mean? That's an interesting line. Children in adult suits. Because they haven't done this deep work. They're not integrated. You can't even talk to them. Currently, during this phase of the, quote, awakening, which often implies a shocking or rude awakening, millions of people are embarking on their journey of individuation for the first time in their lives. That's fucking awesome. I'm so for the empowerment of everyday people. Absolutely. To create lives of abundance for themselves. And to do this deep work continually. Personally, I'm around a lot of sleepers, and there are degrees to which I myself am asleep and newly awakening to certain ideas. That's why I read this content. It awakens something deep within. It's important to get the information. How you use it is another matter. I'll continue. They are just barely getting out of the consensus state of the masses and herd consciousness, which is already challenging, as it means letting go of old beliefs, what they thought they wanted, and attachments to past associations, groups, friends, and even family, and most importantly, who they thought they were. It is a rebirth process. The old and false need to die before the new and true can be born within the world and yourself. This dude is so in touch. Godspeed. Again, I feel really grateful to have found Bernhard when I did. I told you I used to watch a lot of his Instagram videos, but they were too intense. And so I naturally repelled it. He's got a really professional quality studio. And I was just I was taken off guard. I just kept seeing these videos, but I never watched them because the presentation was so polished. When people have a polished presentation or very competent with their content creation, it kind of turns me off. I like more rugged. There's a personal aesthetic that's more for me. I like a more rugged or grainy video, or I record with my iPhone, but I like to see the authenticity shine through with Bernhard. That's why I loved reading his personal story here, which I see is relevant to his article here, so it's targeted as well. I just want to get to know who this person is. Obviously, I listen to his podcasts, but his podcasts are so topical. He's so focused on providing value to his viewer and his reader that that gave me like some flags. They weren't just in the sense that I usually vibe with people who are more authentic and true and just relatable, who share their personality. Bernhard is just like, I'm not trying to call him a machine or like, he's so focused on his goal for awakening humanity that he like, I just don't know his personality. I listen to his podcast and they're so focused. You know what I'm trying to say, right? You've watched my videos before. Bernhard tackles this like a machine would. It's for high value and for awakening purposes. And I think I made my point already. So you understand what I'm talking about. But I find a lot of value in this Substack and these articles. I was going to look at how many people liked the post. 136 likes, 32 comments. That would be another video I could do, is just reading Bernhard's Substack comments. I'd read all those comments on a video. It's very useful. So again, this was Time of Transition, Bernhard Guenther's Substack. His website is veilofreality.com. He also has a podcast. So much value here. So I hope you got something out of this reading. And be sure to support him yourself. Or support me. I always post a link to my music page in the descriptions of my videos. That's one way to show you support my work and my unique transmissions. I find that in my music, I share a lot of value. My creativity, something I love to do. And yeah, that's a great way to support me. Just play an album, you know, and enjoy it. I sell my albums for $2 a piece. So if you like what I do, maybe you'll like my music and get to know me on a deeper level too. But that's all for this one. That was the Time of Transition blog. I hope to bring forward more Mildred Stam readings to talk about my faith journey. So, God bless. Hope you have a wonderful night. See you next time. Peace.